Ranking determined a person's status and ignited desires for power, intelligence, connections, wealth, and employment. In that era, everything had a ranking, and so, the journey of one boy began. In a place called Tory village, a boy was busily chopping wood with an axe. He appeared deeply engrossed in the task, and after completing it, mentioned to himself that his work was finally done. His name was Lowe, a young boy. Just as he finished cutting the wood, an elderly woman called out to him from behind and asked him to help her with her feet next time. Lowe responded with a quick agreement. Suddenly, a girl came running from behind, rushed toward the grandmother, and gave her a light push, expressing her frustration. She exclaimed that the old woman should stop asking Lowe to do everything for her. The girl's name was Yuna, a 16-year-old with a fiery spirit. The grandmother tried to justify herself, saying that Lowe was always standing idly zoning out. Yuna defended him, saying it wasn't like that, and explained that he had simply been born with a spaced-out personality. She then approached Lowe, grabbed his collar, gave him a shake, and pointed out that everyone treated him like a convenient tool because he always agreed to help them. Lowe replied that he honestly didn't mind. Yuna, clearly frustrated, shouted that he was missing the point. She admitted that she knew he was kind and good-hearted, but then leaned in and whispered in his ear, asking if he wanted to leave the village. She added that she had discovered a hidden path no one else knew about. The grandmother, overhearing the conversation, shouted in protest, reminding them of the village rule that strictly prohibited going outside. She pointed her stick at Yuna and demanded an explanation. Yuna questioned why they were never allowed to leave. The grandmother firmly replied that her answer was no. Then, the grandfather ordered 2 men nearby to lock Yuna up for a while. The men obeyed, grabbing Yuna as she resisted and shouted that the situation was ridiculous and unfair. Lowe and another elder stood nearby, observing the scene. The man then asked Lowe to help him draw some water. Lowe responded quickly and affirmatively. The man noted that Lowe and Yuna were the only ones around the same age in the village, yet they were complete opposites. Meanwhile, Yuna, still being taken away, cried out that she didn't want them to grow apart. The man turned to Lowe and told him that it was okay to take a break sometimes, reminding him that he must have things he wanted to do too. Lowe looked confused and denied it, insisting he would help. As he walked away to fetch water, memories from his past filled his mind. How he had lost his parents at an early age and had been left all alone. Yet, the villagers had embraced him like family. He reflected that he was aware of their kindness, and because of that, he wanted to repay them. Returning to the present, he affirmed his desire to help everyone, expressing that he truly loved the village and the people in it. Hearing this, the man became emotional and, with tears of joy, asked Lowe if he wanted to live with them starting that day. Lowe politely declined, explaining that he still had the house his parents had left behind. In his heart, Lowe believed the village mattered more than anything else, and the outside world meant little to him. Meanwhile, Yuna, now locked inside a cage, yelled at the grandmother, demanding to be let out. The grandfather sighed in exasperation, remarking that she should at least try to take after Lowe. Yuna continued to shout, questioning why they were never allowed to leave the village. The grandfather attempted to justify their rules by saying they occasionally invited merchants into the village, implying that there wasn't much they were missing. But Yuna countered passionately, pointing out that the outside world was vast, and she couldn't understand why they were always confined. The grandmother eventually responded that it was because they were a people who were resented. Confused, Yuna asked who resented them. The grandmother gave no direct answer, saying only that she didn't need to know, and that time would sort everything out eventually. Later, Lowe was seen finishing his task of drawing water for the man. Looking exhausted, he turned around and noticed Yuna hiding behind a large rock. She signaled for him to stay quiet by placing a finger to her lips. She motioned for him to come closer, and when he did, he asked her if she had escaped again. Yuna chuckled, saying that after getting caught so many times, escaping had become easy. Lowe remarked that it wasn't something to be proud of. Yuna brushed it off and urged him to come with her. Though confused, he followed. She led him to a small cave near the forest. Lowe expressed concern that if they went outside again, the grandmother would be furious. Yuna reassured him that it would be fine since it was only for a short while, insisting that she had something to show him. They began walking through the cave. She pointed ahead and told him that what she wanted to show him was right there. As they approached, they found themselves facing a breathtaking view of a beautiful valley and a flowing river. Lowe stood in awe, astonished and excited by the incredible sight. He expressed how amazing it all felt. Yuna, observing his reaction, pulled out a book and asked if he knew the rules of the outside world. Still overwhelmed, he asked what she meant. She began reading from the book, explaining that, according to it, which she had secretly obtained from a merchant, the outside world operated on a system called ranking. Adventurers, couriers, doctors, and musicians were all ranked. Weapons, food, strength, and wealth were also ranked, and everyone appeared to be in constant competition. Lowe was amazed to learn that the outside world had its own set of rules. Yuna confirmed it, adding that unlike the village rules, the rules of the outside world actually sounded fun. Energized by the idea, Lowe declared that he wanted to become a ranked adventurer. someone who could travel the world, compete with rivals and one day become cool and respected. Still, he hesitated and pointed out that they were not allowed to leave the village. But Yuna dismissed the restriction, telling him that she had already made up her mind. She invited him to come along, urging him to join her on an adventure and insisting that he had to go out there someday. Yuna had looked at Lowe and reminded him softly whether he remembered the time when they were just 5 years old and a huge bird had attacked her, and he had saved her. She asked if he recalled that moment. Lowe seemed puzzled and asked her if that really happened. She nodded, insisting it did. She spoke of a green buzzing creature that went woong woong and said that from that moment she had known. Even though he often spaced out. When he truly put his heart into something, he became stronger than anyone else. She believed he would shine even brighter outside the village him once again to come with her and explore the world. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, but Lowe, still overwhelmed, simply thanked her. He confessed that he loved the village too much to leave it behind. Yuna's expression changed immediately. She became frustrated and called him stubborn. She snapped that she would leave on her own, telling him to stay stuck in the village forever if that's what he wanted. Without waiting for a reply, she turned away. Lowe, watching her walk off, warned her to be careful on her way back. As she disappeared from view, Lowe sat still, thinking to himself that he never imagined Yuna would truly leave the village. Her words about rankings and the outside world still echoed in his mind, unfamiliar and intriguing. Evening fell, and he remained seated, lost in thought, until eventually he muttered that he should head back. Just as he stood up to leave, something strange appeared in the sky. A bizarre object, resembling a UFO, hovered above, emitting a strange light. It began to descend toward him. Fear gripped him, and he instinctively closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the light had vanished. Trying to calm himself, he told himself it was nothing and began running back toward the village, shouting for Yuna, for the grandmother, and for the other villagers. But when he reached the village, he froze in disbelief. The entire area had been wiped out. Homes reduced to rubble, the land barren. There was no sign of anyone. His voice trembled as he called out, asking where everyone had gone. His mind spun with panic and sorrow. He remembered Yuna's words, that she would always be by his side, that he was never alone. He also recalled the villagers' kindness, the way they had embraced him after his parents died, telling him he was family. He dropped to his knees on the empty ground, tears streaming down his face as he mourned the sudden loss. The weight of regret crushed him as he whispered that he was too late again. Suddenly a man approached from the shadows and said gently that all he could do was watch. Coming closer, he looked at Lowe and confirmed that he was the only survivor from Tory village. Lowe, voice shaking, admitted that he was. The man nodded, acknowledging how difficult it must be for him, but urged him not to worry, saying that the island was now gone forever. Lowe stared at him in confusion, asking what he meant by island, and demanded answers about the strange object in the sky. He begged to know what had happened to the village and its people. Overwhelmed with emotion, he grabbed the man by the collar, tears flowing, and shouted for an explanation. Instead of replying, the man handed him a piece of paper and told him to forget the village and head to the location marked on it. There, he said, Lowe would be able to live safely. But Lowe was still in shock, still desperate for the truth. He cried out again, asking for answers. The man finally lost his patience and shouted back that the entire village had vanished. He told Lowe that this was not something a child should be involved in and begged him to stop digging into it further. The past, he said, had to be left behind, or Lowe would only end up as another casualty. But Lowe stood firm. He clenched his fists and declared that he couldn't forget, not after everything. Yuna's words echoed once again in his heart. Even though you space out all the time, when you put your heart into it, you're stronger than anyone else. With resolve burning in his eyes, Lowe shouted that he would go to that island, whatever it was. And no matter what it took, he would bring everyone back. Lowe stood in silence, gazing at the ruins of the destroyed village, his mind overwhelmed by memories. He recalled how, when he was young, his parents had died in a landslide, leaving him completely alone. The villagers, however, had taken him in and cared for him with great kindness. Yuna had always stayed by his side. They had all been genuinely good people, the kind who could never ignore someone who was hurt. Sweet and kind-hearted, they had given him a second family. He wondered how he could ever forget them. Determined, he resolved that he would go to that island and bring everyone back, no matter what it took. As he stood there, he became aware of an unusual concentration of prana, sensing that the very space around him seemed to be distorting. He reminded himself that prana referred to the mental energy of living beings, an inner power that anyone could possess, though very few were aware of it. While most prana remained colorless and transparent, talented individuals could intentionally harness it, and in some cases, those with powerful prana could make it visible. It was even said that certain races possessed special forms of prana. From a distance, a man observed Lowe and identified him as the survivor of Babel. The man acknowledged that his priority had always been protection, but it seemed Lowe had escaped and survived on his own without understanding the circumstances around him. The man spoke, saying that if Lowe truly wanted to go to that island, then he should pick up the sword. He added that if he saw potential in Lowe, he would train him, but only if Lowe came at him with the intent to kill. Then he handed the sword to Lowe. The two began to fight and train together, preparing for the days ahead. The man recognized that, as expected, Lowe was a beginner, but the pressure he exerted and the waves of prana surrounding him were extraordinary. He began to believe that Lowe was the real deal. During their training, the man began sharing important information with Lowe. He explained that the place Lowe sought was called the Island of the Gods. Lowe sat on the ground, listening intently. The man described how the island typically floated on the vast sea, but, on rare occasions, appeared in entirely different locations, erasing both people and land in its wake. The man confessed that he had been working to prevent such events, but once again, he had been too late. He mentioned a theory that the humans enveloped in that mysterious light might have been transported to the Island of the Gods. Lowe then asked whether touching that light might take him there as well. The man replied that, as he had said, it was just a theory. Perhaps those people were still alive, but no one knew what might be happening to them. When Lowe asked what he should do now, the man explained that there was a direct approach. Through the adventurer ranking system, Lowe would have to rank within the top 10. Surprised by the mention of adventurer rankings, Lowe asked what that meant. The man clarified that adventurers were responsible for surviving and exploring uncharted territories. It was the ranking with the highest number of participants, and those who made it to the top ranks were considered monsters in terms of strength. If someone could make it into the top 10, they would earn the right to go to the Island of the Gods. He warned Lowe that the Island of the Gods had consistently been classified as the #1 danger zone, and almost no adventurer had ever returned alive. Despite this, he asked Lowe if he still wished to go. Lowe confirmed his resolve without hesitation. Accepting his determination, the man agreed to train him for a year. However, he clarified that all he could teach Lowe was the art of the sword. After that, Lowe would have to climb the adventurer rankings on his own, using his mentor merely as a stepping stone. The man then introduced himself, stating that his name was Adel, ranked #1 in that ranking, and known as the strongest knight of humanity. He then asked Lowe for his name. Lowe introduced himself simply as Lowe. They shook hands, and Adel warned him that he would not go easy on him, especially since Lowe had been the first person to cut him down with a single strike. And so began a hellish year. Blisters burst on Lowe's hands and feet, muscles tore, bones cracked, and blood poured from nearly every part of his body. Adel never spoke about the Island of the Gods again after that day, as if silently telling Lowe that he would have to discover everything else on his own, and if he couldn't, then he might as well give up. Despite the grueling training, Lowe held on to the belief that the villagers might still be alive. He had no choice but to keep believing. Every day, Adel trained him without rest or mercy. During those long days, Lowe often pondered the fate of the villagers and the true nature of the Island of the Gods. He vowed to climb the adventurer rankings to uncover the truth. 1 year later, Adel and Lowe stood once more on the edge of the same mountain and river, where Lowe had last seen his village before it vanished. Adel turned to him and asked if he was ready. Lowe replied that he had been ready for quite some time. He closed his eyes and recalled the moment when Yuna had told him of her dream to become an adventurer. She had asked him to come along with her on that journey. Returning to the present, Lowe thought of how Yuna, who had once longed for the outside world, was now gone, and how, against all odds, he had become the one to set out. For now he would hold on to Yuna's dream. Adel then gave the signal to depart, telling him, "Let's go, Lowe." Lowe responded with a firm yes. Adel looked at him and noted that he was now 17 years old and had grown much taller. Lowe remarked that it was his growth period, as the disciple of humanity's strongest knight. And with that, Lowe's adventure to the Island of the Gods began. At the Trachista branch of the Appraisal Bureau, Luke stirred awake at her desk. Someone nearby called her name, reminding her that it was almost time. She jolted up, muttering under her breath that she was in trouble for dozing off again. Rising quickly, she walked through the hallway alongside a colleague. The colleague glanced sideways at her and asked whether she had stayed up all night checking the rankings again. Luke confirmed without hesitation, remarking that she was an appraiser after all. Her colleague sighed, reminding her that being an appraiser meant she needed to take better care of her condition. Unlike those in desk jobs, she was responsible for determining the ranks of adventurers across the world. Appraisers were dispatched globally to assess rankers' skills and update the rankings accordingly. It was a highly demanding and prestigious role. Appraisers were expected to possess extensive expertise and unbiased judgment. Before they could judge others' merit, they themselves had to pass rigorous assessments, making it one of the strictest professions, reserved only for the most qualified. Luke admitted that although she was an appraiser, she still ranked low within the system. She added that if she wanted to do what she truly desired, she'd need to climb the internal ranks. When her colleague asked what exactly she wanted to do, Luke vaguely replied that there were a bunch of things. Her colleague pointed out that the fastest path to promotion for an appraiser was to become the exclusive appraiser of a skilled ranker. Luke agreed in theory but confessed that she couldn't find any ranker she actually liked. Her colleague teased that her standards were simply too high. Luke didn't deny it. In her view, most rankers these days were just plain dull. She reminisced that back in the day, the ranking competitions had been fiercer, and top spots in most categories were no longer so fixed. Now the stability of the rankings seemed to undermine the very purpose of having appraisers around. Rankings were supposed to reflect constant change and growth. Her colleague chuckled and called her a ranking maniac. Luke proudly accepted the label. As they walked downstairs together, Luke voiced her hopes aloud, wondering if there was a new star out there, promising figure who could shake up the rankings. Her colleague smiled and gestured toward a nearby door, suggesting that perhaps such a star was inside. As the door opened, they were met with the sight of a large group of men sitting in the hall. Luke stepped in and commented that it was the third time this year that the Adventurer Ranking Registration exam was being held, and that it seemed unusually crowded. Her colleague nodded and said it was likely due to Aspen Forest being added to the Danger Zone rankings 2 months prior. Luke agreed that it made sense and scanned the room. Her colleague pointed to a few individuals and began introducing them. One was Old Darkus, ranked 753 in the mercenary category and the leader of the Red Wolf Mercenary Corps, considered a top-notch Rocky fighter in the country. Another was Eddie Marksman, ranked 42 in the Archer category. The Marksman family had a rich legacy in archery. Eddie's father had once been ranked number 2, and his older brother currently held the 7th rank. Rumor had it that Eddie's arrow speed already reached double digits, making him a formidable talent for his age. Aside from them, there were a few others who appeared promising. Luke looked around and correctly guessed some of their ranks: a merchant ranker, a knight ranker, a sailor ranker, and even a guide ranker. Her colleague was impressed and asked how she could be so confident. Luke grinned, stating that as an appraiser, she could usually determine someone's ranking category just by observing them. Luke added that the adventurer ranking had become especially useful lately. Many people wanted to register under it because it was a requirement to enter dangerous places such as Aspen Forest. Just then, a bell rang, and her colleague excused herself to return to her desk. At that moment, a young man, Lowe, approached the front desk. She greeted him warmly. He asked if this was where one could register for the rankings. She confirmed that it was. The rankings were managed by the Appraisal Bureau, and appraisers dispatched throughout the land evaluated rankers' achievements and abilities to determine their ranks. She informed him that while updates to existing ranks could be done by any certified appraiser, initial registration had to be completed at an official bureau. Lowe stated that he wished to register for the adventurer ranking. She told him his timing was perfect, as the entrance exam was about to begin. She asked if he'd like to join. He nodded. She handed him a form to fill out and explained that the examination fee was 3,000 mel. After completing the paperwork and submitting the fee, she thanked him and directed him to a waiting room, letting him know that his candidate number was 53. Meanwhile, Luke had walked over and observed the exchange. She scoffed quietly, noting how some bumpkins still didn't know what the appraisal bureau even was. Her colleague chuckled and said it had been a while since she'd needed to explain the basics. She then asked Luke if she'd be willing to help grade the written portion of the exam. Luke agreed, saying that desk work wasn't so bad once in a while. Her colleague laughed and asked if Luke was mocking her, but Luke replied earnestly that she wasn't. Soon the exam began. The desk manager stood on stage and addressed the room full of hopeful candidates, announcing the commencement of the Adventurer Ranking Registration exam. She explained that the exam consisted of 3 parts: a written test, a practical test, and a final test, whose contents would only be revealed right before it began. She reassured the examinees that their overall score would determine their success. A poor performance in one section could be redeemed by strong scores in the others, so they were urged not to give up prematurely. The written test began. Candidates bent over their desks, muttering about how difficult the questions were and how vast the scope seemed. After a while, the time was called, and the manager informed them that the practical test would be held in 2 hours in the forest outside the village. They were instructed to wait until the results of the written test were ready, after which they would be guided to the forest. She then asked Luke to assist with grading. Luke agreed. As they worked through the tests, Luke eventually picked up a paper labeled with candidate number 53. She immediately recognized it as belonging to the boy who had come to the desk earlier, the one with the lifeless eyes. She glanced at his answers. One question asked candidates to name 3 routes to Yorsum Island. His answer: I do not know. Another question required identification of a demon's offspring based on its symbolic mark. He had scribbled something ambiguous: 2 or 3. All of them were wrong. Luke marked the answers with a grimace, thinking to herself how ridiculous the test was, and how frustrating it was for her to grade such papers created by some country bumpkin who probably didn't even understand what they were being tested on. 2 hours later, all of them arrived at the forest. The front desk manager explained that the practical test was a treasure hunt. The candidates were required to deliver the items listed on a provided form. They were told to refer to the point values listed on the right side of the form and aim for the items with higher scores, if they wished. However, the manager made it clear that fighting between participants was prohibited, and whoever touched an item first would have the right to claim it. One of the candidates expressed confidence in their knowledge of herbs, while another remarked that they were good at catching bugs. After that, the practical examination officially began, and all the candidates started running toward their chosen tasks. The front desk manager, observing the scene, commented that it was finally a break. Luke was also present there. The manager wondered silently how many candidates would pass the test. Luke replied that perhaps half of them might, since their movements made it evident that they were quite competent this time. The manager then asked Luke if anyone had caught his eye. Luke responded that, once again, no one had. Suddenly, one of the candidates approached. It was old Darkus, who claimed to be the first to finish. He handed over a Rigel War and earned 120 points. The manager reminded him that there were still some items left and asked if he intended to stop there. Ol confirmed that he did, stating that he had already passed. The manager informed him that he would start at a higher ranking once officially registered. Ol, however, remarked that it didn't matter to him, since his real job was that of a mercenary, and he didn't care about the adventurer rankings. Another candidate, Eddie, then arrived and stated that he had thought he was the first, only to find someone else already there. The desk manager identified the item he brought as a tail feather from a flock bird and awarded him 180 points. Eddie questioned whether that score was a bit too high, pointing out that flock birds were commonly eaten in his household. Old Darkus mocked him, saying he was bragging over what he called feathers. Eddie clarified that he wasn't bragging and explained that flock birds could fly silently at speeds of 500 m/h, making them nearly invisible to the naked eye. Old Darkus, feigning surprise, admitted he hadn't known about those qualities and sarcastically suggested that, with all those tricks, perhaps a clown suit would suit Eddie better. Angered, Eddie asked if he wanted to test that. Ol replied affirmatively, and both of them began arguing and preparing to fight. The desk manager observed the tension and remarked that rankers really had a lot of pride. Luke responded that this pride was precisely what made them rankers. Suddenly, everyone was stunned when someone else appeared. It was Lowe, and he had brought with him the entire corpse of a red grizzly. Lowe explained that he didn't know how to extract the gallbladder, so he decided to bring the whole thing. The desk manager, visibly surprised, confirmed that this was acceptable and awarded 300 points for the red grizzly's gallbladder. All of the candidates standing nearby were astonished, wondering who this person was who had taken down a red grizzly solo. Luke looked at Lowe and noted that, despite having performed poorly on the written test, Lowe had correctly identified the red grizzly. Lowe responded that these beasts often showed up near his village, so he was familiar with how they looked. Curious, Luke asked about his village. Meanwhile, Luke overheard a conversation among some of the other candidates. One of them mentioned having seen the event unfold firsthand, but admitted that they couldn't describe it clearly. According to the candidate, Lowe had simply drawn his sword, and the next thing they knew, the red grizzly had already been sliced down. Luke was genuinely surprised upon hearing this. 1 hour later, in the underground training facility, an announcement came from the front desk manager. She addressed everyone and asked if they knew whom an adventurer must always be wary of. She answered her own question, stating that it would be both beasts and humans. Since an adventurer's mission is to explore new lands, they often venture into unpopulated areas. There they usually face threats from bandits or pirates. She explained that strength was essential to overcome such threats. Therefore, the final test would be a mock battle in which the candidates would compete against each other. She reassured them that the purpose was simply to gauge their abilities, so they shouldn't be too nervous. Winning or losing would not determine whether they passed. Eddie remarked that, had this information been disclosed earlier, some people might have tried to eliminate others during the practical test. He concluded that this was likely the reason it had been kept secret until now. Meanwhile, a sailor ranker approached Old Darkus and challenged him to a fight. He accused Ol of merely picking up a rock during the earlier test and claimed he had heard that the mercenary rankings were full of loud, third-rate thugs. He declared that he would crush Ol right then and there. Old Darkus turned around and, without hesitation, struck him hard with his sword, sending him sliding across the ground. He apologized, stating that he couldn't tolerate such an insult. The front desk manager, observing the situation, noted that since the challenger had already failed the previous course, they could pretend the incident hadn't occurred. She added that, even if he had been trying to make a comeback, it was a foolish attempt. Being third class in a major ranking, she thought, essentially meant being a monster. As she looked over the crowd, she began to wonder who would be a worthy opponent for Ol. She speculated silently that it might be Eddie. Just then, Luke approached the front desk manager. She greeted him and asked what was going on. Luke asked if he could choose the fighters for one of the matches. The desk manager, somewhat uncertain, said that he could. Luke then announced that for match number 8, candidates number 27 and number 41 would team up and fight against candidate number 53. Old Darkus reacted by saying that Luke must be out of his mind. Eddie added that it had been a while since he had been this underestimated. The desk manager, clearly surprised by the pairing, asked Luke if he was really okay with that decision. Luke confirmed that he was, and added that if his eyes were not mistaken, Lowe was a monster. The battle between Lowe and the duo, Ol and Eddie, commenced as the audience watched with bated breath. Both the manager and Luke appeared visibly excited, especially for this highly anticipated round. Old Darkus, the leader of the Red Wolf mercenary group, had already earned a name for himself the previous year by single-handedly eliminating the Kamor Mafia, an organization that ranked 67nd among criminal syndicates. It was widely believed that he had taken down 7 of the mafia's top executives, including their boss, entirely on his own. On the other hand stood Eddie Markman, the young heir of the prestigious Markman family of archers, trained rigorously from a young age by his father. Once the second highest-ranked archer, Eddie had been officially registered in the ranking system at just 5 years old. There wasn't an archer in the profession unfamiliar with Eddie's name, and many believed his skills were a true testament to his family's legacy. Now, the two formidable opponents faced an unfamiliar, unranked young man, Lowe. As the manager announced the beginning of the match, swords clashed at once. Candidates watching the match murmured in amazement, some confessing they couldn't even see the movements, only hear the sound of steel slicing through air. Adel, in the midst of combat, realized he wasn't facing an ordinary swordsman. The fineness and sheer pressure of Lowe's strikes made him wonder whether this man ranked among the top knights. Eddie too, though never having seen Lowe before, agreed with Adel's assessment. During the exchange, Lowe suddenly questioned the two, asking if they ranked in any categories beyond their current fields. Eddie answered that he held the 407th position in the archery ranking, while Adel mentioned he was 753rd among mercenaries. Lowe responded calmly, noting that if he could defeat both of them, it would certainly be enough to earn himself a 3-digit rank. Then, without warning, Lowe began emitting a visible aura. Adel paused to analyze it, deeply unsettled by the oppressive pressure that Lowe now radiated. Even Luke, watching from the sidelines, was shocked. He could see the aura with his naked eyes, something he hadn't expected. He muttered to himself that it was prana, pure energy, and an incredible amount of it. Eddie, preparing to shoot, mentioned that rankings weren't strictly about occupation alone. He said while he stood at 407 in archery, he also held a place in the sniper category, which measured shooting precision. Lowe cut him off, revealing that he ranked 78th in that category. The revelation stunned Adel, and the fight escalated. Lowe's prana surged as the battle climaxed. In a sudden flash he appeared before Adel, his sword now pressed to Adel's neck. Without hesitation, Adel declared his surrender, stating that he had work after this match and couldn't afford to be knocked out like Eddie, who had already collapsed. Adel, gasping for breath, admitted to himself that Lowe was a terrifying monster. He found himself wondering who this mysterious individual really was. Around them, the rest of the candidates stood in stunned silence. No one could believe that this unknown man had just defeated 2 ranked fighters, both of whom were 3-digit rankers. Luke, still in awe, decided that was enough. The manager formally declared candidate No. 53 Lowe as the winner. As the crowd murmured in amazement, Luke left the arena and went straight to the computer room. There she opened the appraiser exclusive database to investigate. She pulled up Lowe's information. Lowe, 17 years old, with no previous ranking experience. Despite possessing immense skills, he had never been documented. Luke thought it made sense if he had grown up in an extremely remote village. He wasn't affiliated with any criminal syndicate, nor was he part of any hidden sect. She leaned back in her chair, muttering that they had just discovered a jackpot. She had never seen talent this raw and hidden. Without wasting another second, she burst out of the computer room and shouted in front of the whole audience, declaring that she wanted Lowe to be her exclusive appraisee. The moment she said this, other candidates began protesting, clamoring for her attention. One begged her to choose him instead, claiming he would be a better fit. Another asked if she was serious, but Luke knew she had been too late. Ideally, one should investigate a candidate thoroughly before making an exclusive offer. Still, she couldn't let go of this opportunity. Lowe, still processing the outcome of the fight, was taken aback by her offer. He asked what an exclusive appraiser even was. Luke passionately explained that an exclusive appraiser is someone who dedicates themselves to a single ranker, regularly updating their rankings without the need to wait for official appraisal bureau dispatches. This service was especially appreciated by ranked adventurers who frequently traveled and didn't have time to wait for bureaucratic procedures. She handed him a device, the ranktel, short for ranking telegram, used only by exclusive appraisers. With this he could receive real-time ranking information and updates. She added that if he wished to raise his rank efficiently, hiring an exclusive appraiser like her was essential. Lowe, holding the device, paused for a moment and then replied that if efficient ranking was truly the goal, he had one condition. He turned toward the crowd and asked in a calm but powerful voice whether there was anyone present who could get him into the top 10 of the adventurer ranking. Upon hearing Lowe's condition, one of the onlookers responded in disbelief, saying that the top 10 of the adventurer ranking was filled with monsters. Another added that while Lowe's sportsmanship was admirable, that alone wasn't enough to reach such heights. Lowe didn't say a word and began walking away. Luke, not ready to let go, called out and hurried after him. She questioned him, asking why he was so determined to enter the top 10 of the adventurer ranking. He coldly replied that it was none of her business. Refusing to be brushed off, she declared that she would make it her business. She would become his exclusive appraiser and guide him to the top 10 herself. He told her he didn't want to put anyone in danger. Furious, she retorted that before being a kid she was an appraiser, and if age mattered, he was a kid too. Regardless, she had no intention of hiring just anyone. He said he didn't want to drag others into his mission. She grew serious and confessed that she had a mission of her own, something she had to accomplish even if it cost her life. and for that, she wanted to join hands with him. Lowe turned, silently thinking to himself that he would go to that island and bring everyone back. Then he finally responded, admitting that he too had something he absolutely needed to do. She introduced herself as Luke Ameldia, vowing to guide him toward becoming a top ranker. He introduced himself as Lowe Tooley, then extended his hand. The two of them shook hands. Luke then took him to a room, asking how it was. She explained that she had rented it for a few days so they could use it as their base for now. He thanked her, commenting that she had good skills. She replied humbly, saying it was nothing. He then remarked that he hadn't expected her to add a probation period under that kind of atmosphere. He recalled that he had said, "For now, let's try for a week." She apologized, saying she was just being cautious. Luke smiled and said she would prove how competent she was during that week, and that by the end of it, he would be the one begging her to become his exclusive appraiser. He replied that it would be nice if she didn't talk as if it were someone else's business. Luke noted that while he was an amazing fighter, in all other aspects, he seemed a bit spaced out. He admitted that he heard that a lot. She bet as much. Then she pointed toward the ranking telegram device and showed him the results. His new ranking appeared on screen. Lowe Tooley, Adventure ranking 27, 28th place. She congratulated him on passing the Adventurer ranking registration test, telling him it was amazing to start in the 2000s. He was underwhelmed and said he thought he'd place in the 3 digits. Luke asked why. He replied that both his opponents in the test were 3-digit rankers, one in the Archer ranking at 4 and the other in the Mercenary ranking at 753. Luke explained that the Adventurer ranking had more people compared to other rankings, so the competition was much fiercer. No matter how strong someone was, there was a limit to how they would place initially, and besides there were other rankings besides occupation-based ones. She pointed out that Lowe's sword speed ranking was already 58th, which was quite impressive. He seemed indifferent, simply asking if his two opponents had similar other rankings. Adel had a mercenary ranking of 753rd, a swordsman ranking of 521st, a special cleaning ranking of 209th and info 231st, and a reliable boss ranking 86th. Eddie Markman, on the other hand, had an archer ranking of 400, a sniper ranking of 78th, a reconnaissance ranking of 211th, and even a mushroom cultivation ranking of 19th. She explained that being part of multiple rankings would allow him to find more work. He replied that he wasn't looking for work. Luke said that even though they hadn't known each other for long, she felt like she understood him a little. She knew he wanted to get into the top 10 as quickly as possible, and she also guessed that his destination was the Island of Gods. He was startled and asked how she knew. Luke revealed that entering the Island of Gods was the only special privilege granted to those in the top 10 of the Adventurer ranking. She asked if he would tell her the reason after the probation period ended. He agreed. She responded that she would share her own circumstances at that time too. He nodded, saying that was fair. Luke noted that fairness was important, but her situation was complicated and not easily explained to someone who had just registered. What she was chasing, she said, was the darkness of the rankings. He was puzzled and asked what she meant, but she dismissed it with a, "Never mind." Then, shifting the topic, she asked him how he had become so strong. His performance during the match was not something one could learn overnight. Lowe answered that a year ago, he had become a disciple of a knight named Adol. Luke was stunned. She grabbed him by the collar and asked if he meant the Adel, the first-ranked knight. Lowe remembered how Adel had introduced himself, claiming to be the world's strongest knight. Lowe confirmed it, saying that even though he had been his disciple, it had only been for a year. Luke was speechless. Even a year under Adel was incredible. She pointed out that Adel was famous for never accepting disciples. If there were a ranking for rejecting students, he'd be ranked first in that too. There had long been rumors that Adel was searching for a successor worthy of inheriting his title. Many knights had desperately tried to raise their rankings just to gain his attention. Yet Lowe, without anyone knowing, had already inherited that title. If other knights heard about it, they would lose their minds. Lowe thought to himself that Adel was truly an amazing person. He remembered how Adel once said, "I am humanity's strongest knight." Luke agreed, he was the world's strongest. But Lowe then casually mentioned that he had actually beaten Adel in a sword fight, cutting him down in a single stroke. Luke stared at him in disbelief, calling him a liar and insisting that was impossible. She was exasperated that he could say something so outrageous while looking completely spaced out. She then muttered that she needed to check the database again, because even after reviewing all the ranking data, Lowe's name had only just appeared, and she started to wonder if that surname was an alias. Lowe found his thoughts drifting back to a moment from the past, when Adel had unexpectedly asked him what his surname was. The question had caught him completely off guard, and he had stared back, uncertain of what to say. It was then that Adel had realized that perhaps Lowe's confusion came from a cultural difference. With a thoughtful expression, Adel had advised him that if he wanted to take the shortest path to the Island of the Gods, he should begin introducing himself as Lowe Tooley. Although the risk would be high, Adel had said that if Lowe did things properly, important clues might come to him without having to search. Lowe had accepted the suggestion and promised he would do so. Returning to the present, when Luke had asked him whether Tooley was just an alias, he had calmly denied it. He had told her it wasn't an alias at all, that Tory was his real surname, the name of the family he held most dear. Luke had nodded in understanding, thanked him for sharing, and remarked that they should call it a day. She had added that her work as an appraiser was finished for the time being. As she removed her hat, Lowe had been taken aback to see her long hair cascade down over her shoulders. It was only then that he had realized something he hadn't noticed until now. With clear surprise, he had asked if she was a woman. Luke, clearly irritated, had questioned whether he had only just realized that. When he had muttered an apology, she had shot him a sharp look and said that a simple sorry wasn't nearly enough to make up for such an oblivious remark. The next morning, Luke was sitting in the lounge, casually reading a newspaper. When she noticed Lowe descending the stairs, she greeted him, remarking that he was up early. Lowe responded awkwardly, initially claiming he was there to get some water. When she didn't seem to understand, he brushed it off and simply greeted her properly, wishing her a good morning. Luke returned the greeting and suggested they have breakfast together. As she began tying her hair and placing her cap on, she mentioned that their journey would be long, but today marked the first step. She proposed they have a proper strategy meeting over breakfast to aim for the top 10 of the adventurer ranking. While eating, Luke explained that in order to raise one's adventurer ranking, one needed to accumulate adventure achievements. She said land development and exploration were the basics, and those could be done voluntarily. However, she recommended taking on requests instead, as there were many who required the strength of adventurers for tasks like gathering or investigation. The benefit, she added, was that requests often came with rewards and were perfect for beginners. She informed him that requests could be received either from the Accreditation Bureau or, depending on the country, from a guild union. If she were around, she could handle all of it with a single device. Lowe, upon hearing this, asked what that device was called. Luke told him it was a rank tell, a very convenient tool. If she became his exclusive accreditation officer, she would be able to use it freely, though she mentioned she'd think more about that later. He asked if there were any requests that could easily boost his ranking, and the two of them began looking through the ranking device together. Luke told him that one simply had to accept high difficulty requests. She showed him how requests listed through the Accreditation Bureau often indicated how much they would impact one's ranking upon completion. Intrigued, Lowe suggested he would just take the request listed at the top. They looked at the topmost request, which was marked as Danger Zone Ranking 7. Retrieve the hidden dryer from the Rokiana underwater temple. Luke immediately dismissed the idea, stating that the task was completely impossible for him at his current level. Lowe, however, insisted that they wouldn't know unless they tried. Luke replied that she already knew, even without trying. She urged him to trust her eyes as an accreditation officer, emphasizing that the request was far too dangerous. Attempting it now would almost certainly get him killed before he raised his ranking. Still, Lowe was adamant. He pointed out that the Isle of Gods was ranked first in terms of danger and insisted that he couldn't afford to back down here. Luke stared at him, realizing he was far more stubborn than she had expected. She concluded she would have to find a way to persuade him. Just then, a man seated nearby, who had been listening to their conversation, spoke up. He remarked that it sounded like they had a problem. Recognizing him, Luke addressed him as Mr. Laud and noted that had been a while. When Lowe asked who the man was, Luke introduced him as Laud Broward, an exceptionally strong adventurer ranked 11th. Lowe was stunned to hear the number. His thoughts drifted to what Adel had once said, that most of the people in the top ranks across various categories were monsters in their own right, and here was one of them, Laud Broward, just one step away from being eligible to challenge the Isle of Gods. Luke seized the opportunity and turned to Laud with a request. She asked him to help her by beating Lowe up. Soon the three of them were standing in an empty practice ground. Laud, holding a weapon he'd borrowed, told Lowe that he hadn't expected him to accept the duel. Though the weapon felt a bit light, it would suffice. Lowe introduced himself as Lowe Tooley. Laud replied with a smile, asking if formal speech was uncomfortable for him and told him to speak casually. After all, manners were unnecessary in the adventurer ranking world. Turning to Luke, Laud praised her previous rank evaluations. He admired her passion and conviction, which according to him were qualities most other accreditation officers lacked. Because it was a request from Luke, he said he'd gladly help out, especially to teach their stubborn beginner a lesson. Luke noted aloud that Laud seemed to genuinely care about her. Meanwhile, Lowe observed Laud and could feel the man's strength just by looking at him. The moment Lowe prepared to charge, it felt as though he might be completely overwhelmed by Laud's spear. Luke cheered him on from the sidelines, urging him to take this rare chance to witness how vast and fierce the world truly was. Lowe, however, quietly told himself that he already knew the vastness of the world. Then the battle began. It was Lowe Tooley ranked 2728th in the adventure ranking against Laud Broward ranked 11th. Luke called out for them to start the match. The two charged at each other with weapons drawn. Laud began analyzing Lowe's movements. He noted that Lowe was channeling prana into his sword and unleashing it with a slash. He also realized that Lowe was coating his hands and feet with prana to boost his agility. But what startled him most was the swordsmanship. It wasn't just skillful, it bore the unmistakable traits of the Sword Saint's direct lineage. That particular style was a secret sword art, traditionally passed down to only one disciple in a lifetime. It made no sense for a child to have inherited it. As he watched Lowe's fluid movements, Lowe scowled, wondering why the boy looked so spaced out while wielding such a sacred style. When Lowe suddenly counterattacked, Lowe narrowly avoided it and retorted that he was still quite relaxed. But internally Lowe was shaken. Just observing Lowe's prana output, he could tell that Lowe had more raw power than him. And then there was the shimmer, the strange quality of prana that couldn't be obtained later in life. Lowe demanded to know what tribe Lowe came from. Lowe, once again confused, asked what he meant by tribe. Lowe warned him that playing dumb wouldn't help anymore. That shimmer in his prana wasn't something one developed with time. He concluded that if Lowe wasn't going to talk, he'd find out himself. He added that Lowe could use arts too, right? Lowe remained confused. Lowe then invoked an ancient technique, reciting a poetic verse. The furiously galloping horse, passing many mountains, seeks its breath. Watching the water's surface ripple in newly bloomed sunlight, finding peace, it turns its hooves and leaps with pride. He declared it as the art of the Broward tribe, spear arts or zen. And then, staring directly at Lowe, he warned that if Lowe didn't use his own art, he would die. As the clash between weapons echoed across the training ground, Lowe and Lowe remained fully immersed in the intensity of their duel. Sparks flew from every strike, and the force of their attacks rattled through the ground beneath their feet. Amidst the blur of movement, Lowe's voice cut through the noise, warning Lowe that such moves would be ineffective. He explained that no ordinary sword could stand up to technique he was using. Despite the warning, Lowe gathered every ounce of strength and attempted another strike, his expression filled with grim determination. Yet again his effort fell short. In that moment, a memory stirred in Lowe's mind, one from his days under Adel's guidance. He recalled how Adel had once observed that his prana control was still far too rough and unrefined, but reassured him that with time, he would learn to handle it properly. Once that control was achieved, the path to mastering techniques would gradually open. At the time, Lowe had asked Adel which techniques he meant. In response, Adel had told him to observe carefully and had then demonstrated one of the simplest, most fundamental techniques to begin with. Now Lowe drew on that teaching. He calmed his breath, focused deeply, and activated that very technique against Lowe. Lowe immediately sensed the shift in energy. His mind quickly registered the speed of the attack. It was astonishing, far too quick for the naked eye to follow. A supersonic slash, sudden and sharp, cut through the space between them with a brilliance that caught even him off guard. He silently acknowledged the move as highly impressive for someone so new to combat at this level. But even with that, he reminded himself that the wall separating Lowe from the top was still steep and unforgiving. He warned Lowe not to underestimate what it meant to be ranked as an adventurer. With a surge of power, Lowe released his own technique, his prana exploding outward in brilliant waves. The pressure in the air shifted violently, and in the next moment, Lowe was driven to the ground, utterly overwhelmed. The match was over. The difference between them had been made painfully clear. Lowe exhaled and approached Luke, asking her calmly whether she was satisfied now. She responded with a nod of appreciation, expressing that the lesson had likely reached Lowe by this point. Lowe paused for a beat, then asked if she had truly believed the boy could win. Luke offered a faint smile and admitted that she had only thought it might be possible, just enough to hold on to that small hope. Lowe gave a low chuckle, his tone mixed with amusement and insight. He remarked that it was probably because Lowe was Adel's disciple, wasn't it? Luke looked surprised by how quickly he had figured it out and asked whether it had been that obvious. Lowe replied that the moment he saw that supersonic slash he had recognized it. That technique, after all, belonged to the legendary Sword Saint style. It was a secret form of swordsmanship, passed down to only one successor per generation within a noble lineage of knight rankers. For a mere adventurer to wield such a technique was unheard of. From the perspective of those born and raised in the knight order, it would be seen not only as a betrayal, but as sacrilege, like having a sacred emblem stolen. While Lowe lay unconscious nearby, Luke's expression turned more solemn. She voiced her concern, saying that they would likely need to take precautions to prevent Lowe from crossing paths with any knight rankers. Lowe agreed without hesitation, warning her that in the worst-case scenario, Lowe could be killed. He added that if Lowe had been a knight ranker himself, the situation might be more manageable. Luke lowered her gaze slightly. She had already been thinking the same. Her mind drifted back to something Lowe had once said to her with unshakable conviction, that he absolutely had to do something important. She knew that it likely wasn't possible, at least not yet, but she hadn't placed her faith in him simply because he wielded the Sword Saint style. Her trust was rooted in something far deeper. She revealed to Lowe that the real reason she believed in Lowe was because she had once heard he managed to land a clean hit on Lowe's son. Lowe froze at her words, visibly startled. He questioned her again, trying to confirm whether he had heard her correctly. Luke nodded and repeated that Lowe had claimed to land a direct hit during a match with his son. She admitted that it sounded unbelievable, and even she had doubted it at first. But Lowe didn't strike her as the kind of person who would make something like that up. There had to be some explanation. Lowe grew thoughtful, his gaze distant as he tried to make sense of what she had said. The revelation that Lowe had used a sword technique had already taken him by surprise. But more than that, what had unsettled him deeply was the peculiar shimmer in Lowe's prana. It was not something that could simply be developed or learned later in life. It was innate, something rooted in blood or lineage. As he reflected on this, he quietly walked over to where his weapon lay on the ground and picked it up. Luke observed him closely and spoke again, her voice calm but firm. She told him that the boy probably had another technique, something he hadn't used yet. Lowe turned to look at her, his expression darkening slightly. With a slow nod, he admitted that if Lowe had used that hidden technique during their duel, he might very well have lost. On the other side, a beautiful girl named Yuna was standing in the kitchen, cooking something while murmuring a poem under her breath. Suddenly, the door was flung open by her grandmother, who asked what she was humming. The old woman scolded her, saying it was foolish, and reminded her that the poem was the reason they could not go outside. She sternly warned Yuna never let those words pass her lips again, making sure she understood. After delivering her harsh words, the grandmother left. Yuna stood there, deep in thought, and softly said that she was sorry to Lowe. Elsewhere, Lowe was lying on a bed, wounded from a recent duel. His body was completely wrapped in bandages. As he regained consciousness, he asked where he was. Luke, who was sitting beside him, responded by saying that he had finally woken up and that they were in the infirmary of the Recognition Bureau. Luke explained that Lowe had been asleep all day. Hearing that, Lowe expressed surprise, asking if it had truly been all day. Luke confirmed it and remarked that it was as if a switch had been flipped. The doctor had said Lowe appeared to be suffering from accumulated mental fatigue. Luke admitted not knowing what Lowe was carrying emotionally, but wondered if perhaps he was pushing himself too hard. Lowe quietly agreed, suggesting that perhaps Luke was right. With a serious tone, Luke bowed slightly and said there was something important to share. Luke asked if Lowe knew what incantations were. Lowe shook his head, admitting he did not. Luke explained that incantations were a special way of using prana, a technique that only certain races were capable of using. Many among the top rankers possessed this ability. Lowe then asked if Lowe was one of those individuals. Luke affirmed it, stating that Lowe belonged to the Blauwerd tribe, a combat-oriented race known for their hunting skills, residing in the southern marshlands. Luke explained that within the tribe, such techniques were often passed down orally in the form of poems, and hence were called incantations. There was a genetic element involved as well, making it difficult to acquire them later in life. Lowe reflected quietly, realizing that this was what incantations were. Luke continued, mentioning that Lowe might possess incantations too, and asked if Lowe had any idea about it. Lowe said he thought he did. Luke, encouraged by his response, remarked that incantations were an incredible asset for tankers. Luke expressed renewed confidence in Lowe's potential, insisting he could definitely become one of the top rankers. While speaking, Luke looked at a telegram and said there was a perfect quest for him. It was an investigation quest in the Azaban forest, an ecological survey of a forest that had been designated a danger zone and ranked 48th just 2 months prior. Lowe asked if the task involved simply investigating animals and such. In response, Luke showed him a device and said that was only part of it. The real concern was that people had recently been going missing in the forest. One after another, adventurers who had taken the same quest had vanished without a trace. Initially, it had been adventurers ranked in the thousands, but more recently, even one ranked in the 800s had disappeared. Luke explained that if Lowe could uncover the cause of these disappearances, he could potentially reach adventurer rank 25. Based on Luke's estimation, Lowe could easily climb 200 ranks, although the risk would naturally be much higher. Lowe declared that he would take the quest. He also added that Luke must have introduced the quest to him because of believing in his capabilities. Luke nodded and confirmed that, yes, it was true. They agreed to proceed with the acceptance procedure immediately. Luke then warned Lowe that in the Azaban forest, certain animals were prohibited from being hunted, and there were restricted areas. Although Luke believed it would be manageable since they would be going together, it was important that Lowe be cautious as well. Lowe inquired about the consequences of not following those rules. Luke explained that his adventurer ranking would drop. Luke emphasized that no matter how skilled someone was, if they recklessly harmed the ecosystem or repeatedly failed quests, their reputation would crumble. An adventurer's ranking, Luke said, was the foundation of their credibility. Lowe nodded in understanding. Luke then showed him a device screen and announced that the quest had been accepted. Luke turned to Lowe and said that this quest marked the beginning of a new chapter. It was the first step towards soaring up the adventurer rankings. Together, they would do their best. Filled with excitement, Lowe wholeheartedly agreed. Deep within the forest, 2 men were engaged in a fierce battle. A third man approached from behind and addressed one of them, stating that he could not pretend not to have seen what had already happened. He asked if the man had killed again. The fighter shrugged off the concern, replying that it didn't matter, as the Recognition Bureau would not even bother searching for low-ranked adventurers like the one he had just killed. He remarked that it felt foolish to genuinely attempt to climb the rankings through honest effort. Turning his gaze toward a cage, he pointed out the creature inside, a Yuna. He remarked that simply selling the creature's horn would catapult him into the 3-digit rankings in no time. An old man nearby commented that strength alone was not enough to rise in the adventurer rankings. He declared that his existence was dedicated to those who suffered under such unfairness. This man's name was Rosso Cruel, a smuggler ranked 7th. Meanwhile, another man stood staring at the cage, contemplating the potential. He declared that if he had to give up such a valuable hunting ground, he would surely break into the top 100. His name was Falcon Iris, an adventurer ranked 670 soon.